Thanks for coming. I'm going to get us kicked off. Welcome to our Get Grant Ready, how farmers can use cash flow to prepare for funding. In this next hour, Andy Larson from the Food Finance Institute and I will discuss how loans can impact cash flow and profitability and how you can use your financials to best prepare for grant applications. This session is being recorded and I will share on our website the recording in the upcoming weeks. So as an overview, here's what we've got for the next hour. We want to focus on preparing you for grant applications by looking at your cash flow. The grant landscape is changing quickly, so being as prepared as possible is especially important today. Andy and I will discuss eligibility and funder fit, matching funds and cost recovery, and don't worry, we'll explain what that means, funding opportunities, and share some helpful resources to support your farm. My name is Jamie Rahrig. I work at the Center for Regional Food Systems and the Product Center at Michigan State University. In my role as Assistant Director of Partnerships and Director of Food and Farm Business Assistance and Support, I work across Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin to coordinate assistance to help food and farm businesses start up and scale. I managed the Michigan Good Food Fund at Michigan State for many years, helping businesses prepare for financing, and as the lead author of funding sources for food-related businesses, try to keep up on the pulse of all the different funding opportunities that we have available for food and farm businesses. And now I'll pass it off to Andy to introduce himself.
The pulse is a little thready right now, isn't it? Hey, you guys, Andy Larson. I work for the Food Finance Institute, as well as a little bit with SARE, Sustainable Ag Research and Education. With FFI, I am the Farm Program Manager, and FFI works with food and farm entrepreneurs of all stripes. I spend most of my time with small to mid-scale farmers who are doing farming and food manufacturing, farming and retail, farming and something else that they're adding value to their product. So that is my primary clientele. I do one-on-one business consulting with these folks. I also do courses and classes like this virtually and online. So also a poultry farmer in the background coming at you from the basement of the chicken ranch in the Illinois-Wisconsin border region. So lovely to see some well, I can't see your faces, but some familiar names on here. Looking forward to talking with you for the next hour or so.
Thanks, Andy. And I think that often, most commonly, farmers are always farmer and something else. So always have their hands full, that's for sure. Andy and I are coming together today under the umbrella of a program called the Great Lakes Midwest Regional Food Business Center. And we have partners across the Midwest, such as the Northwest Indiana Food Council, the Chicago Food Policy Action Coalition, the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, and then at our organizations. And these folks are available to you to provide additional assistance if you live in those regions or you identify as a tribal producer. And I can put that link in the chat here so that you can reach out if you need some contact information. But I do have some other news to share on this program. In July, the USDA decided that the Regional Food Business Center program would be ending. So after September 15th, unfortunately, this program is coming to a close. It means that we are going to continue to offer assistance like this, including a few other webinars and sessions that we have coming up. But after September 15th, we have to end this work. It also means that some of the grant applications that we had talked about that were coming out called Business Builder Subawards, we can no longer offer. That doesn't mean that we have changed our commitment to food and farm businesses across the region. We continue to be there for you and want to help the businesses thrive. So please, if you would want to stay in touch with us and you haven't signed up for our emails, I'll put that information in the chat for you as well. And you can chat with us too. If you want to introduce yourselves, now that we've introduced ourselves, and let us know who you are, where you're from, where you're farming, what you're farming, whatever you feel like sharing today, we would appreciate that.
And I know a whole bunch of you, so you can't hide.
And I'm just going to put those links in the chat that I promised twice accidentally. Okay. So I'm going to get us kicked off here on eligibility and fit. One of the most important things that we can do when we find a grant opportunity is make sure that we're eligible and that it's a fit for a farm. So something that you want to think about is, are you the right applicant? Are you the type of applicant that they're looking for? Sometimes it's a university, sometimes it's not a farmer. Does the project align with what you're working on? Does the criteria make sense? And the scoring rubric can often act as your guide. And then considering what funding impact that you might have that is going to look attractive to that funder. So let's dig in a little bit on the applicant type. It's important for you to carefully review the application materials, which are sometimes called a request for proposals or request for application, or you might hear us say RFP or RFA. We love acronyms. The first thing to know is that if you are the type of applicant that they're looking for, that's the first thing to look for. Again, you're not a university, you're a farmer, or maybe you could partner with a university if it was a research grant, for example. And just it's not worth your time to apply to a grant if you're not eligible. All
You
right.
can't sneak in, they'll see you.
Yeah, they have clear eyes. Yes. The next thing is to consider is your project type. So grants usually cover very specific types of work. We just put a few examples up on the screen that it might be. Like for example, the like a SARE project, maybe it's around education, or maybe there's some other grants related to a college or university you could partner with to do research with them. Or maybe there's a demonstration they're asking for, or again, some more education. Not every grant is going to be for building construction or infrastructure or equipment. So if you're looking for that, be very careful to review the request for proposals and the application materials to make sure what you're looking for. Some of the other things to think about are the criteria that the funder lists. Again, not every grant is going to be appropriate for every farm. It might not be a fit for you this year, but maybe it is next year, as you scale or as you modify what you're selling. The people who review grant applications are experts in their field, and many of them score very hard. So if you can't meet the criteria, you might not want to apply for that grant. And again, it takes a lot of time to apply for grants. So making sure that you're a good fit is really important before you spend the time. I think I skipped ahead. Every grant, I think maybe I didn't skip ahead. Let's keep going. Scoring rubric. So let's talk about that. So a rubric is just, a list of items that people are looking for. So often the funders will share that on the website or with their grant application. And you can almost use it as your guide on how to write it. It's really smart because that's how the reviewer is going to be going through it. This is this section, this section, this section, and you can write just like that. We believe that the reviewers don't necessarily have the time to read deeply into it and try to understand what you're implying. They're going to be moving fast through the applications. So try to hit every point as plainly as you can, bulleted points if they allow that on the application, and try not to miss answering any questions, because you might lose points.
I've read a lot of grants in my day, a lot of grant applications in my day, and I'm sure Jamie has too. And usually we figure out for ourselves how many minutes we can spend on each of these apps in order to be able to get through the whole pile that's sitting on our desk that we have to have in by, the next day because the deadline's coming up. So yeah, it's one of those things where if you're a long form copywriter where it's just like paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, oh my God, use some formatting. Oh my God, use some headings. Oh my God, use some bullets, because it is going to make our jobs so much more efficient. And that is going to make us happier when we write down our scores.
No kidding. Yeah. And that we didn't even mention that there's probably a word count limit. So you might not be able to put in the paragraph and paragraphs and paragraphs, but sometimes it's good to start with more and then shrink it down, right? And make sure that you've covered all of the points. Okay. Last on our list to talk about in this section, anyway, is to make sure that your project is imp directing at their impacts. So if they're asking for a project that is going to bring equity into our food system, talk about how you're going to be able to do that. Or if they're talking about how the equipment purchases will be able to impact um, more sales of that particular product in the market, make sure that you talk about that. Those are their impacts that they're looking for and that they need to reach to. Um, be sure to include real numbers, looking at your financial statements, which Andy's going to go into more and be able to help as you think about writing for a grant. And make sure that if they're going to be able to look at points, if they're going to give you additional points for how it impacts a greater community, not just your farm, then that can be really important too. That this value added product that you're producing is now getting out into the market and is going to be sold in across the state or across the nation or internationally, that sort of thing. So make sure that you are paying attention to those points. All right, I'm going to be quiet and pass it on to Andy.
Do you you probably have to advance slides for me, don't you, Jamie? So I'll just yell when it's time if that's okay. Or do I actually have control in some way, shape, or form?
Let me, yep, let me give you control.
Maybe. You guys, it is really nice to see you. I'm glad to have you all here. The match and cost recovery thing is something that's been on Jamie and my's mind for a while here. As we were thinking about making grants specifically to underserved populations with, potentially lower capital to be able to throw at a grant opportunity. We were trying to figure out how can folks still participate in some of these grant things that have been coming out that require one-to-one match or greater. Ooh, click the start mouse keyboard control on the shared screen. Okay. Hey, I'm doing it, you guys. Hot diggity. Okay. Um, how can folks who are under-resourced be able to participate in some of these things that require one-to-one match or greater, that require you to outlay your capital first before you can request reimbursement from a grantor? It's getting more and more common nowadays. It was going to be a thing that we were going to have to do with the business builder. These cost reimbursable grants and these matching grants can be absolutely wonderful opportunities, but you do occasionally have to spend money to make that grant money. Now, they are not all that way. Liz Brownlee is here from SARE, and this is an example of a schedule from SARE that provides 50% of the funds up front, 35% at the halfway point, and 15% upon the final report. So it's not everybody that's requiring you to throw all your cash out first and then get reimbursed for those costs and expenditures. However, some of the bigger ones and the ones that I'm going to use as an example repeatedly throughout the course of the next half hour or so is the value added producer grants. It's one of those grant opportunities that's available for farmers that can be a life-changing, business-changing type of windfall at $250,000 worth of grant value. However, it also has to be $250,000 worth of matched contribution in order to get access to that. So we're going to talk about some strategies for tracking, we're going to talk about some strategies for reimbursing, and we're going to talk about how to potentially use credit in order to get some of those first financial outlays out the door. I want to advance the slide and it doesn't want to. You want to do it for me, Jamie? Thank you. First and foremost, you are going to be, in all likelihood, with a matching grant or a cost reimbursement grant dealing with a larger order, red tapey, type of institution, like the USDA, for example. So applying for reimbursement every time you make an expenditure, every time I go to the hardware store and buy seed, I'm going to apply for a reimbursement from the USDA. Probably not a plausible way to go about this. It's really going to be you accumulating probably several months worth of expenditures before it's even worth your time and worth their time to process the paperwork that is required to get those funds back in your hands. So it does become very, very, very important to know how you're going to track project related expenditures. And these are not only cash expenditures, and you can track those relatively easily in bank account statements. You can do it in QuickBooks. You can have your own spreadsheet that you built yourself. I'll show you one in just a minute here. But you're going to have some of those non-cash, in-kind type of contributions for a lot of the grant opportunities that are available today. So, one of the things that we as farmers are not particularly used to doing is tracking personnel time. Why? Because it's depressing when we think about how many hours we spend doing what we do. But this is going to be a really good time to start if, for example, staff time, including your own, that of the proprietor, is eligible as a reimbursable cost. The other thing, again, specifically for the value added producer grant, if you're going to be using raw farm commodity in a value added process or procedure, whatever your farm contributes in terms of commodity is going to have a value associated with it as well. So it's not just going to be transactions that go through your farm checking account. It's going to be some of those other things that you contribute that have value associated with them, and you're going to have a methodology for keeping track of those things. Just to show you on a little spreadsheet action here, maybe. There we are. So if you are the type of person who does a cash flow projection, and you should be that type of person if you are not already, for the upcoming year on your farm, it's a really, really good place to kind of predict what you expect to expend and what that's going to be, or what of those expenses are going to be related to the grant project and what ones are not. So here, for example, is just a simplified cash flow for my little egg farm here. And I was thinking to myself, all right, of these things that I do, what would be eligible expenses for a value added producer grant project? And so I highlighted in yellow, when I'm purchasing inventory, purchasing eggs from other people to turn around and resell, that would be an eligible expense. The packaging supplies that I use in order to put those things in packages and get them delivered, that would be an expense. Another car and truck expenses, that's the mileage that I accumulate in the family minivan driving eggs around the countryside. All of those things would be things that would potentially be a contribution of in-kind time or money towards a grant project, or it would be an eligible expense. What is not on here, because we don't normally have to predict it, is exactly how much time I'm going to spend doing this stuff, or exactly what kind of commodity value the eggs that I'm going to be contributing to the project have. So up here at the top, and I don't know if I have a highlighter or anything like that, but up here at the top where it says cash inflows from sales, those sales to restaurants and retail stores are the price I am charging, but they're not necessarily the price that the USDA values those things at as a commodity. So you got to be really careful about what benchmark you use to request that reimbursement. Okay, so a little bit more about that in the next slide. Probably. Probably. There it goes. Okay. And so I don't know why it takes as long as it does for it to advance, but I'll tap dance every time if I need to, Jamie.
It looks like it's every other slide lets you and every other slide lets me advance. So that's how we're working. We're just rolling. We're rolling.
Again, thinking about the value-added producer grants as a substantial an example that a substantial number of you are likely to be considering. That gets even a little bit more complicated. So this is an example worksheet from the workbook that VAPG used to publish on their website. I don't know if they're not there now, but it is still representative, showing that yes, I will give a more clear example of that in just a moment, Anna. This is showing that you need to break down what you're going to be doing with your project by tasks, and that's in the top little document there. And then each task is going to have activities or expenses associated with that. And with each of those lines, it's going to be asking you what VAPG is supposed to contribute, what you're going to contribute from a cash standpoint, and what you're going to contribute from an in-kind standpoint. So it takes a little bit more accounting and tracking to keep close tabs on what you can request and when. When you're breaking it down to this level of detail, that is, well, let's put it this way, that's typical for a very, very large scale, very, very complicated, very, very heavy lift grant like the value added producer grants. SARE and some of our other local, like community foundations and things like that, are not going to have this level of detail associated with them. But I see many of you in here are grant professionals as well, nonprofit heads, things like that. You're used to these kind of things. Farmers are going to see these as a lot more planning outlay than what they're used to for the beginning of a typical growing season or the beginning of a typical project that they're going to use to grow their business. So be sure that you have whatever infrastructure you need in place to be able to accurately keep track of cash contributions, in-kind contributions, and what you're going to request for reimbursement from the feds or whatever other grant making organization you're going to be working with. A little strategy. Come on, you can do it. There we go. A little strategy that you can kind of keep in mind if you're trying to, if you're in a situation where you don't have a big pile of cash to outlay before you start requesting reimbursements, and you need to figure out how you can sort of build that kitty a little bit. If you can kind of fill your coffers with a little bit of cash money to do some of the more cash intensive portions of your grant project. One possible strategy for you is to think about the when you're planning your grant project, front loading a lot of the in-kind match, because that's not necessarily going to require you to outlay a whole bunch of actual dollars and cents. It will require you, in all likelihood, to put in time and product, but you might be able to get into a little bit of a small pile of dollars, not necessarily enough to swim in or anything like that, but a small pile of dollars to get you started on some of those more cash intensive parts. There are two links here, and I'm going to show you examples of these on the next two slides that give you places where, and thank you, Jamie, for spelling out some of those acronyms. I should probably do it on a repeated basis. Um, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Oh, that's fine. You can go ahead and move forward. Or did I
Oh,
move forward?
I was trying to copy those links, but it didn't work.
Shoot. I might be able to do so really quick. Yes, I can. Give me just one moment, and I will throw them both into the chat for folks. The risk that we run is that when we throw links in the chat, then people go following them and stop listening. There they are
I
for
hear
your
Andy saying,
edification.
keep listening, please.
So these are two what I guess I would call what would be authoritative sources for some of the dollars and cents that you're going to be justifying with your project budget. This is from the BLS. They have occupational employment and wage statistics. This is not current. I can't get them to show in this nice condensed format anymore because they keep changing their website. So this isn't current, but it is an example that they're. So what I did is over there in the upper right, you can see I put farm in there as the search table text. And so it popped up these 8 different occupation codes that had farm in the name. And so, what I want you to be clear eyed about is what sort of category of occupation you're really fulfilling in your role. Folks who are the proprietors of farms, I think we have, in my mind, justification for being that 11-9013, the farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural managers. We are running the business. We are making the business decisions. We are keeping track of the finances. We're doing the marketing. We're doing the value adding, whatever else it is. And I want to point out that up there, under the mean and median hourly wages, we're in the low 40s. Not so bad. Probably more than what we would predict if we were just thinking about what our normal labor is worth. And it's true. Some of the things that we do, pitch and chicken litter, for example, is probably not a $40 an hour job here in Northern Illinois. All right. But the financial management, the marketing, the other, administrative level stuff that we have to do for our business, that probably is a higher dollar role. Down a little bit further, you can see that there are a couple categories for general farm workers and farm laborers, and they're more in the 17 and change type of realm. Again, these are not current numbers. They may have gone up a little bit in recent years, but the type of humans that you have contributing in-kind time is also going to contribute, or is also going to add to the calculation of what kind of in-kind value you're throwing at your project. I'm going to try and go to the next slide here. Cool. And so the AMS market news, and Jamie, if you that one's already up there, so you don't have to post that again. The market news site has got most of the commodities that you can think of and their sort of commodity values with their normal commodity marketplaces. So when you're thinking about a grant like VAPG, like the Value Added Producer Grant, the whole point of the project is to take that commodity and do something to it in order to make it more valuable. So what you're contributing is that initial commodity value of the thing that's going to get more worth more money as you keep doing these processes and procedures and or marketing practices and or whatever else to it. And so, for example, if you are a hog producer and you're trying to go from raw commodity into aged prosciutto in a facility that you've built on your farm, um, you can count the value of every ham that you throw into that processing and aging facility, but you got to count it at the commodity value. So down there where it's talking about ham primals, that's much more likely to be the number that you can value that stuff at, as opposed to the many dollars per fractions of an ounce that you'd get for a finished prosciutto product. All right, so don't think about your stuff that you're putting into this project as the gold mine initially. Think about it as a commodity first, and then talk about what you're going to do to add value to it. That's the project for you. Okay, so I think I have an example of this on the next page of how this all kind of rolls together. All right, so this is a really, really common example that we experience in Wisconsin. There's a lot of folks that really want to put commodity milk into glass bottles and get them marketed that way. And so if I were to apply for a grant that would allow me to do that kind of value-added procedure with my commodity milk, these are some of the things I'd be able to contribute. So I'm just putting round numbers on here to make the math easy. If I throw in 100 hours at 40 bucks an hour like that graph just showed, if other staff members or volunteers throw in their time and that's at 17 bucks an hour like that graph just showed, and they put in 100 hours, if I contribute 100 hundredweights of raw milk, and each one of those is worth $20 on the commodity market right now, that's 2 grand worth of value contribution. And if I already owned 300 glass bottles, which that's not going to be nearly enough for 100 hundredweights, is it? I made the math a little too easy on me here. So 300 glass bottles worth $1 each, that's $300 worth of value contribution. So all told, that time and that packaging and that commodity that you threw towards your project is worth about $8,000, and that is, you have plausible deniability that that $8,000 is a real number based on USDA numbers and statistics. So even with a zero cash in so far to the project, you'd be able to request $4,000 of reimbursement for the time, the effort, and the products that you've thrown at that grant project. So if trying to get into a small pile of cash to do something that is cash intensive a little bit later on in the project is an important thing for you, this is one potential strategy to do it. Does it matter whether you're paying yourself or others to claim an in-kind match? What about volunteers? I don't actually know the answer to volunteers, Heidi. Volunteers are worth something, and there are statistics out there that somebody publishes, I can't remember who, about the total valuation of volunteer hours in the United States every year. Um, I don't know how that gets broken down or categorized or anything like that, but that would be another. Okay, Liz, thank you very much. That would be an authoritative source of the dollar value of their time. So I feel like that would be something that you could definitely throw at it. Um, so yeah, it does matter because the type of work that they're doing does matter. If the other person that's doing this work, um, excuse me, I'm trying to keep up on the chat too. If the other person that is doing this work is also an agricultural manager, say it's another proprietor of another farm that is in the project with you, and that was going to be 40 or $43 an hour labor as well, great, you can call it that amount. You just have to be able to justify what you're putting down as the dollar value. And I do apologize for the typographical error. I'm a little bad about, I cop and tribute something. So sorry about that, you guys. You know what I mean. Um, yeah, good question, Heidi. I appreciate that.
Andy, do you want to go back to what Anna had asked about commodity prices
Sure,
before we
sure,
get too much
sure.
further?
Clear example of the commodity prices USDA uses. Could you share a link to that list or where we could find that info? So that's the second link that I posted just a few minutes ago, Anna, the one that's ams.usda.gov/market news. That's going to point you at, well, I'm just going to click on it. I don't think I can share my screen, but if you click on that, you'll see market news categories for it looks like a small number, but it busts out into a whole lot of stuff. So if, for example, just to, honor what's on the slide, I click on dairy. I could look at um, individual dairy market news, commodity reports, or international, or, you can use whichever one is the most appropriate for your commodity. But I'm going to look at fluid, national glance, Central Midwest Fluid Milk PDF. Okay, so that's going to be the one that's most appropriate for my area. So, Class 3 Milk FOB is looking at 275. The Midwest US Cream spot basis, high price 134, 308, 134, 308. So, it gives you some, and I think those are going to be per pound. I don't think that's going to be per hundredweight. That gives you the information that the AMS, the Agricultural Marketing Service, collects on a daily, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, whatever, for the different commodities that you're going to be throwing at your project. So that's about as authoritative as you can get because the outfit that you're applying to is the USDA and the outfit that is collecting these numbers is the USDA. So unless they are willing to decry their own information, it's going to be just about as good as anything that you can get. Okay, two more new messages. Is there a difference between actual paychecks and hourly rates? Ah, okay, sure. So, for example, if you were paying someone to put staff time towards this project work, then yes, I think absolutely you could value their time at the hourly rate that you're actually paying. That graph that I showed earlier is much more about having a stand-in for someone who doesn't receive a paycheck, like the proprietor of a farm. Okay, so yeah, I think that if you paid somebody 25 bucks an hour, but it said on that graph that it was 17 bucks an hour, I think that the actual cash amount that you paid them for a wage is going to be the more appropriate number. What about the reverse case? Oh, where where you're not paying them as much as the USDA thinks they're worth? Um, well, I don't like to hide things from the people who are giving me grants. So I would probably err on the side of caution, and I would request reimbursement at the pay rate that I'm paying them. Just because I'd be worried what would happen if they found out that the reverse case was happening and I was requesting for more than I was actually expending. So That's a personal preference. I'm sure other people might have personal preferences that might be slightly different than mine. But that's the direction that I would lean. Okay, so I'm going to move forward here. Um, I want to talk just a little bit about using credit for a cash match. At the end of the application for the Value Added Producer Grant, it does have a space and a form for your banker to fill out that says, all right, this person who is applying for this grant is approved for a term loan, a revolving line of credit, a whatever, that upon completion of this application and award of this grant, they will be approved for that loan. So those loans can be used as cash match. And you should consider an existing credit facility like a revolving line of credit as a source of cash for cash match in a smaller loan type or in a smaller grant type of situation. Um, many farmers have revolving lines of credit. However, many times they are sized appropriately for them to have the operating capital that is necessary to get their crops in the ground, to get their livestock on the ground, and to get themselves through the whole growing season. So, using their existing revolving line of credit for operating capital may not be the perfect solution because it might hamstring them mid-season from a cash standpoint for it to be covering both their regular operations and this gravy on top, which is the grant project. So it's really important for you as a farmer or you as a grant writer or you as a whomever you are in serving this realm of human beings to be really cognizant of what they need for their farm by itself and what they need additionally in order to be able to get this grant project done.
I love that
So,
thinking about a grant as the gravy on top because a lot of people have come to me over the years and talked about basically financing their business with grants. And it's not recommended. It's not necessarily a strong, solid financial plan. So I definitely like the idea of it being gravy.
I can't agree with you more. Especially, that was one of the things that I was going to say, and towards the end, Jamie, is that in this day and age, I really want everybody to think about a grant as a windfall, a grant as a an expediting mechanism for them to move up their business trajectory faster. Whatever, I want you, each and every one of you, as farmers, to have a really solid business model and business plan that moves you forward, cash flowing from your own profitability. The day and age where we can have um, farm business models that don't cover their own expenses, I think is going away. Yes, we can still have hobbies, right? We can still have lifestyle farms where we have off-farm jobs, we have great benefits, and we have some extra to throw at, having a few fluffy cows or a few goats or a few chickens or, a big garden or whatever. And all that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that as long as you're achieving the lifestyle goals you're trying to pursue. But if we, as farmers, are trying to have a for-profit business, we've got to make sure that whatever business model we're creating is throwing off some cash. It's covering the expenses and it's throwing off some cash in order to remunerate us as the proprietors, the people doing the work, however many hours a week that is. And also, if we care to grow at any point in the not terribly distant future, we might have to have loans and financing as a tool in our toolbox. And we don't get to pay for those until after all the other expenses are covered. So, having a really carefully built business model is important. And using one of those cash flow projections, like I showed on the screen a few slides back, is going to be really important. I did design that for FFI, and I'm willing to share that around if people are interested in it. Just give us a holler, and we can send that out your direction. Okay, so I'll probably repeat some of that at the end, but I'm going to stay more to some tips as well. But okay, using credit for this cash match, it is a nice thing for a lender. And I used to work as a lender before I came here to FFI, you guys. It is a nice thing for a lender to see that they are not the only ones holding the bag from a risk standpoint. Grants can serve as a really nice equity contribution, aka down payment, right? Loans are never 100% of the amount of money you need, right? You have to have some equity contribution into that transaction. They're not going to give you 100% of the money you need to buy a house. They're certainly not going to give you 100% of the money you need to buy farmland. It's usually going to be 70, 75, 80%, something like that. So that other 20 to 25 to 30% has got to be your equity contribution. And that grant can serve that way. So that grant can leverage lent money from a banker, okay? Because it is a risk spreading strategy. That way, if things go sideways, the banker is only on the hook for, a portion of the value of that project. In the space of a one-to-one match type of grant, then it's going to be 50% of the value of the project. So that risk spreading strategy that takes some risk off the table for the banker is going to be a valuable thing for them and move you to yes more quickly. The downside that a lot of folks don't think about is that grant projects, especially grant projects for farmers, up until the last couple of years, generally have not led to new collateral. So collateral is something that a banker can repossess and sell if a loan goes sideways, right? In order to get made whole from whatever they didn't get paid back by the borrower. All of these grants that we're talking about here today are for like SARE and VAPG, which are some of the ones that I predict are going to continue to go on for a while now. They're for research and outreach and inventory and marketing and other operational costs. They do not create collateral that the bank wants. If I'm, bottling fluid milk, the bank does not want my bottles as collateral. The bank does not want my new website as collateral. They do not want those things. They want big ticket items that are easy to repossess and sell. All right. And so you might have to secure a loan for a grant project with something else, with existing collateral that you already have that makes a little bit more sense to the banker. And I say this to people all the time, especially to people getting into some kind of like less well-known type of production. If you're getting into aquaponics and you're producing basil and fish, but what the collateral looks like for a loan to get into that aquaponics operation is a whole bunch of pipes and valves and tubes and controls, the banker's going to be like, if this goes sideways, I don't want to sell a bunch of pipes and tubes. You got anything else that I can use for collateral? Well, I got a pickup truck. Okay. I know what to do with a pickup truck. I know what to do with a tractor. I know what to do with a semi. I know, the banker, the easier their life is in a collection situation, the less risk they are going to perceive, and the faster you're going to get to yes. If you still do not have enough stuff to act as collateral outside of the grant project, there is a chance that an open-minded lender might consider a loan guarantee enough. Loan guarantees are third-party promises to make a lender whole in a collection situation. The FSA, the Farm Services Agency, somebody that's very familiar to all us folks here in farm country, they do make loan guarantees. And that is just saying you pay a certain amount of money and the bank receives a promise from the FSA saying, all right, Mr. or Mrs. Banker, if Mr. or Mrs. Borrower does not make the payments and they go into a default situation where they're not going to pay you back, we will pay you 90% of the outstanding principal remaining on their loan. That pretty much removes any remaining risk from the table for the banker. They're like, okay, that sounds good. I've got 50% of this thing coming from a grant. I've got the other, 40% of it coming from this FSA guarantee. There is very little risk on the table left for me. I'll go ahead and make this loan, even if it's under collateralized. Some financial institutions will be willing to do that. I'm going to give an example here. So, quick example. Again, thinking about, a VAPG project. Say a small organic vegetable farm wants to turn They want to expand into a bigger CSA and they want to start doing value-added products. Tomato sauce is a really common example. Salsa is a really common example. Barbecue sauce is a really common example. Um, First question is, does the world need another tomato sauce? That's the question to ask yourself when you're designing your business model, okay? And if it does, what makes your business model defensible, right? How does the next person not just come and copy your tomato sauce? Anyway, that's a lesson for another day that any of y'all can participate in. So say a small organic vegetable farm wins a $250,000 value-added producer grant. It's a market expansion grant. They're going to grow their CSA. They're going to start getting into value-added products. So the stuff that's on that grant budget, the grant plan and budget, includes packaging, rent, supplies, web design, marketing, operating stuff, marketing stuff. It's not a tractor. It's not a truck. It's not cows. It's not those things that bankers find easy to collateralize. All right. So it's still a great thing. It still grows your business. It still saves you from having to outlay cash out of your pocket as the farmer. And so, can a grant for operating capital, like this stuff that I have listed here, still get you into that fancy new tractor? Yeah, because you didn't necessarily have to lay out the cash that was necessary to grow that business. You're getting that business into a higher cash flow and higher profitability point, and you're going to be at a situation where you can afford that tractor better. Okay, so even though you can't necessarily apply for the tractor, you can still get yourself into a better financial position. Okay, so even after your in-kind match, this farm still needs $100,000 of cash to throw at the $250,000 that the feds are putting in. So in total, it's 250,000 plus 250,000 worth of match, so a $500,000 total project. That's a big deal. It's big growth for a small farm. So if I need 100 grand, man, I'm a small organic vegetable farm. How do I collateralize a $100,000 loan? I might not have enough stuff on my balance sheet to even total up to $100,000. I've seen an awful lot of people get started on rented land with a, 30 or 40 horsepower tractor, a couple of plastic high tunnels, some hand tools, a BCS, not enough stuff to add up to 100,000 bucks. So one of the first offers you could say is like, okay, maybe the bank will be willing to work with me if I buy them an FSA guarantee. FSA guarantees for most applicants do require you to pay them for that guarantee. So it's 1.5% of the principal, that's the guaranteed portion of the principal. All right. So 1,500 bucks in this case would be 1.5% of $100,000. So you do have to remember, thank you, Jamie. You do have to remember that there is a cost associated with getting into one of these guarantees. And the FSA is not the only possible place to get one. You can get one through the SBA. There might be other, private organizations that you can get one through, but that's going to be the most typical one for us in agriculture. Or you could also consider, instead of getting all of that cash available and available on the upfront, you could get yourself into a credit facility that over time you can kind of swim up and down in it during the course of the grant project. And eventually you would have over time that $100,000 to contribute by borrowing 25, paying it off with the proceeds from the project. Borrowing 25, paying it off, and doing that 4 times gets you that 100 grand over the course of a 3-year project. And it's a hell of a lot easier to collateralize a $25,000 revolving line of credit than it is a $100,000 term loan. You could use that 30 or 40 horsepower tractor or a delivery van or the BCS or whatever it is that you've got, because there's a good chance that even a small farm has got that many assets available. Okay, so that's just thinking about how to use credit as a way to get to your cash match contribution. So the last part of this, you guys, is we're thinking a little bit about the future of the sort of grant landscape for farms and farm adjacent business. And man, the old crystal ball is pretty foggy. It really is. It's hard to say what's going to stay the same, and what's going to change. With that news that Jamie just talked about at the beginning of the slideshow, you can tell that the sort of landscape for the way that the USDA is wanting to spend their funds is changing. So, to quote the old Magic 8 Ball, ask again later. But but that's not a very satisfactory answer. So the two things that my crystal ball is telling me will continue in some way, shape, or form, even if it's on a modified schedule, which would be farmer-facing grant opportunities, would be SARE, Sustainable Ag Research and Education, and the value-added producer grants that I've talked about just now. Now, did I delete my SARE slide? No, it's probably just on there next. No, I went too far forward. Let me go back one. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. Okay, for those of you who are familiar with SARE, and I know some of you on this call are, there are two grant programs that often involve farmers and have money available to farmers to do things. It is not to put in a crop, it is not to buy a tractor, it is to do research, outreach, education, or demonstration. All right, so the Farmer Rancher Grant and the Partnership Grant are both really good examples of that. Some tips for being competitive in the grant applicant pool when we are spending our precious few minutes reviewing those grant applications is involving farmers at every point in the grant process. You, as the farmer, you have your colleagues help plan, help implement all that stuff. Don't request unallowable costs. Build on previously funded work. Every grant that SARE has ever funded, the results of that grant are available in its online database, which is listed down there. And it's not a live link. Shoot, sorry about that. Let me put it on there as a live link, you guys. I'll put it in the chat. Thank you, Liz.
Liz is helping us. Thank you, Liz.
um, Make sure you have a good plan for disseminating your results because part of the big vision of this program is to multiply the effectiveness of the work that gets done. So please, please, please do have a way to figure out what kind of impact you had and how to have more impact on more farmers. Okay, so I think that one's going to continue. It is delayed. I'm not going to lie. It is delayed. The last grant awards we were able to make were for our grad student program that came out earlier this year. Normally, we would have another two or three competitive calls for proposals out there, and they are not out there, and people are asking us why. And it's because they're under review, just like so many other programs in this day and age. So, it is a thing that an awful lot of different folks are facing. Eric and Liz. Yay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Eric. I do have some FFI commercials right there at the end. So, but thank you for bringing that up. Navigating Uncertainty is a great program for helping figure out what to do when the crystal ball is murky. SARE grant applications, reach out to SARE staff. Yes, we have state coordinators in every state. We have however many staff we've got. How many staff have we got, Liz? Like 10 or 12 or whatever. And all of us are very willing to have a conversation with you about how to be the most competitive applicant possible. The last thing that I want to point out, and I've been harping on over the course of my portion of this slideshow, is the value-added producer grants. I do hope that those are going to continue. I do not know if the awardees for 2025 have been notified yet. I do know that there has been personnel changeover at the grants office. I know that there has been changeover in how you apply for these things. I don't know what's going on with the future of it. They do have a self-assessment to determine whether or not you're eligible, and that may sound silly, but it's one of the biggest questions with VAPG, is making absolutely 1000% sure that you are an eligible applicant doing an eligible project. Excuse me. Two different kinds of grant applications you can do. The planning grant's the small one, the working capital's the big one. Everybody wants to jump right to the working capital so they can get $250,000 bucks, but it's really useful to leverage the outcomes of the planning grant in order to write a working capital grant. So I would plan for the future, take a couple of years, get a consultant to write you a feasibility study, business plan, marketing plan, whatever it is you need for foundational documents, because those are going to be, in all likelihood, required for the working capital application. They do need one-to-one match. It is cost reimbursable, and a lot of what you're going to be writing, and you're going to be writing a lot, it's like a 20 to 40 page college entrance exam, you guys. It's a big honker. A lot of people hire grant writers to do it, which isn't free either. I know, I get it. But still, it's one of the best windfalls you can think of out there. And once again, just to kind of harp again on that point that Jamie mentioned before, think about grants as an unexpected great thing to move the plan that you already have in place forward faster. If you're thinking about the future of your farm, thinking about how you're growing internally from cash flow, from profitability, is the place to begin. And if you have a strategic leverage point where you can insert a grant award to help grow you faster, that leverage point is what should serve as the basis of the grant application that you're writing to whichever program you're writing to. Okay.
All right, Andy, you did it. That was awesome. Um, you can tell Andy has so much experience and knowledge that he can share. He teaches me something new every time. So thank you. To wrap up, we want to share some resources to try to help the farmers along their journey. There is and I'm sorry, I dropped in a link that looks in the chat that looks mucked up, so I'll try to separate those.
Okay.
The Food Finance Institute, where Andy works, hosts Financial Foundations for Farms. Check that
Yep.
out. Check out the other one that they talked about during times of uncertainty. At the Center for Regional Food Systems, we publish several resources to try to help food and farm businesses prepare for financing. I always say it's best to be ready when you need it. So if you get a big order all of a sudden, it's best to have all your documents around so that you can easily send them off to a lender. So we have a loan readiness for first-time borrowers webinar we just did in June. If you're a first-time borrower, or if you are looking to get some templates for financial projections and things, we have that in our loan readiness toolbox. And if you could stick with me and Andy for
Can I
one.
just say that the Michigan State University Extension templates for farm financial statements are some of the best ones out there. I have literally emailed John Laporte and said, "You do an awesome job with these. Keep doing these."
They
Okay, so
they
just a
sure
little
do.
just a
Yeah,
little
if
push
you
for that.
that's great. Thank you. If you want to ever research Michigan State Extension's on-demand programming, there's so many good webinars and template documents and resources available for farmers. So that team does a great job. All right, go for it, Andy.
So, just so you guys are aware, coming up very shortly here, September 9th, I believe, is the go date. We still have seats available for financial foundations for farms. So that's going to be a three classes of 2 hours each. And you guys, I tell you, it used to be a hell of a lot longer. It was like 4 days, 4 hours plus homework. So everybody is saying that we need to condense our stuff, so we're condensing. Financial Foundations for Farms is going to be an analysis of your business model, business plan, your accounting system, your finance thinking for the future, your profitability, your enterprises, all of that stuff to really kind of set you a stable foundation for building a profitable farm business on top of. So, if you are interested in going through some of that, we would love to have you. The follow-up to Financial Foundations is it's more like a capital access class of financing your farm. And that's where we talk about how do I get into loans? How do I get into grants? How do I get into equity investing? We're doing all that right now for an FMPP grant, which has not been canceled. And we'll be doing it again next year around the same time. So would love to have you in this or that offering that continue to come up through FFI.
All right, sounds really great. I encourage everyone to sign up. So last, we would just really love you to tell us how we did. If you can get out your phone and take a picture of the QR code and fill out a very quick survey. I think it's only 5 or 6 questions. It won't take you but a minute. We would really appreciate it to try to help guide our future programs, and appreciate all the comments in the chat and the questions to make this an engaging program. So appreciate your time, Andy, and I'm gonna end it for there. Reach out if you
Okay.
have any questions, everyone.